Now for our story. Ben Calvert paced angrily up and down the living room of his house on 11th Street in Wakefield. His daughter, Kitt, was out. Upstairs, the baby Kitt had brought back from California and presented to Ben as his own grandson had been screaming for the past half hour. The sound distracted Ben. He walked about the room nervously, thinking,
what the devil's that woman doing to the child? No reason why he should cry like that. Maybe something's sticking him. Maybe he has the colic. His food may not be agreeing with him. There's so many things that can happen. Why doesn't Kitt come home? If anything happens to that child. He's such a fine kid. He's going to have the best of everything. The best that money can buy. He's better than anybody else, and he's going to grow up knowing it. He's going to know how to look out for himself. I'll teach him that. If Kitt had only been a boy. But, well, I've got a grandson now. Why doesn't she come home? Kitt, where have you been? Come in here.
Hello, Dad. What's the matter?
Listen to your child. He's been yelling for the last half hour while you've been gallivanting around heaven knows where.
Well, it's perfectly natural for a child to cry. Doesn't mean a thing.
How do you know? He may be ill.
Nonsense.
Well, you might at least stay around the house once in a while and see that he's properly taken care of.
But you're so silly, Dad. You brought Miss Thorndyke from Chicago. You know she's the very best nurse you can get. So why don't you relax?
Relax?
Certainly. Miss Thorndyke knows what she's doing.
Huh. You know, Kitt, from your attitude toward your child, I'd hardly call you a doting mother.
Well, of course not. I'm not a doting mother.
You mean you don't care what happens to your own son?
Oh, Dad, don't be such a sentimentalist. What do you expect, anyway? My whole life's been torn up. Everything's in a mess, and you accuse me of being a failure as a mother. Try to remember I have other things on my mind.
So have I, but I still have enough feelings left to worry about my own grandson.
All right. You do enough worrying for both of us.
I don't like the way you've been acting lately, Kitt.
Oh, for heaven's sake, Dad, let me alone. Every time I see you, all you do is nag at me. I'm going upstairs.
No, Kitt, no. Wait a minute. You and I have a lot of things to talk over.
That's all we've been doing. Talk. It doesn't do any good, doesn't change anything. I'm sick of it.
Snap out of it, Kitt. You're acting like an hysterical schoolgirl. That's not going to help the situation. We're in a bad spot. And unless we work things out together, we'll be in a worse one. I saw Bill last night.
Oh, did you? And how is our small-time Casanova getting along?
Now, look, behave yourself, will you? Let's discuss this thing intelligently.
All right, Dad, I'm listening.
Kitt, I realize very well how painful, unpleasant a court trial would be for you. I know you want to avoid it.
You've no idea how much I want to avoid it. We have to think of some other way. We must.
Exactly. I'm glad you see that, too. And there's only one way to avoid it. Since Bill's bound and determined to go ahead...
I'm glad you think there is a way. I've been racking my brains...
I made Bill a proposition last night.
What sort of a proposition?
I told him if he'd agreed not to press suit for custody of the child, that you'd go away quietly. Give him a divorce.
But...
That way we can avoid publicity. Do the thing quickly and without a lot of scandal. After all, the main thing Bill's interested in is his freedom. That stands to reason.
Of course. His freedom to run back to the Lane farm, pick up with Peggy Douglas where he left off.
We want that child. And if Bill's mind is made up about the divorce, there's nothing you can do.
That's funny. I almost wish it were the other way around.
Other way? What do you mean?
Just that I'd rather have... No, nothing. Just my feminine pride. Well, Dad, what did Bill say? Do you think there's any hope he'll accept this proposition you made him?
Yes, of course I do. After all, he'd be crazy not to. He wouldn't know what to do with that baby if he had him. His whole life would have to revolve around taking care of it. Bill's
well,
young.
Even if he does, it's still a bad choice. But anything's better than the custody suit. Dragging the whole thing through the courts.
You're right. We can't have that happen. And we won't. You mark my words. Bill's not entirely crazy. He'll listen to reason. Yes? It's as good as settled.
At that moment, Bill Meade, whose love Kitt had tried to hold by tricking Lisa Fenner into giving up her child, was on his way back to work at David Bowman's bank after a trip several miles away to inspect some property. Suddenly, Bill pressed down the brake of David's car, which he used for these business occasions, brought the car to a stop. He'd recognized Aunt Mary Lane's little pickup truck, parked by a farmhouse, just as Aunt Mary herself emerged from the house.
Hello, Aunt Mary.
Why, Bill. Well, this is a nice surprise.
Well, I should say it is. I'm awfully glad to see you. You're just what the doctor ordered.
You look awfully well to me, Bill. I don't believe you need a doctor very badly.
Oh, I'm in good shape physically, but mentally I'm sort of up in the air.
Well, that's too bad, Bill. Anything I can do to help?
Well, if you can spare the time, I wish you'd get in and sit down for a minute. I'd like to tell you what's been happening.
Why, I think I can spare the time, Bill. Nothing's ever so important that I can't take a little time out to talk to a friend.
Oh, swell.
No, don't bother getting out.
Huh?
I'm able to get into a car without a man's help. There.
I hope you don't mind my telling you my various woes, Aunt Mary. I've sort of adopted you as my mother confessor, I guess.
Well, of course I don't mind, Bill. I'm glad you trust my opinions enough to ask my advice. But please don't ever consider me infallible. Everyone can make mistakes, you know.
Yeah. But somehow I doubt that you make them very often. Well, Aunt Mary, what I wanted to tell you was this. Ben Calvert made me what you might call a sort of a proposition last night.
He did?
Yeah.
What about, Bill?
Well, briefly, Mr. Calvert said that if I'd give up all claim to the baby and let them keep him, then Kitt would go away somewhere and get a divorce. In other words, he offered me my freedom, in a sense. A nice, quiet divorce in exchange for my son.
That's rather a strange offer.
Yeah.
Particularly from Ben.
Yeah, I know. You'd never think he'd get to the point of bargaining. But he seems to be awfully anxious to avoid the things going to court.
Well, you know how Ben is. He's got that Calvert pride. And then, sometimes things do come up in court. Facts people would rather not air in public.
Yeah, I guess that's it, all right. But so far as I'm concerned, I just don't want to compromise. I want the divorce, sure. But it's the baby.
I'm glad you feel that way, Bill. That the child's welfare is your most important consideration.
If only I could be sure it is best for the kid. For me to have him, I mean. It's such a responsibility. If I have him, I want to be sure I can do a good job of it and, of bringing him up properly.
Oh, somehow, Bill. I'm not worried about that. I think you could.
Yeah, I think I could. But I'm puzzled about Mr. Calvert suggesting that arrangement. It kind of bothers me.
Well, it does seem a little odd that Ben's willing to give up one thing to get another. Not like him. But, as I said, he must hate the idea of bringing the matter up in court. Of course, he may realize that there's always the chance he might lose everything in the end.
Yeah, that's so. In a way, that bothers me, too. They say it's pretty unusual to award a child to its father. Suppose we did go into court, and I lost.
Well, that's something we can't be sure about. But at least, Bill, you'd have some chance that way. I mean, if you were to agree to Ben's proposition right now, you'd know you'd given up your son completely.
Oh, I hate to think about it.
Bill, you've already told me that what you have to think about is purely and simply what will be best for the baby. That's the important thing. And I feel that whatever you decide will be best in the long run for the child's happiness. That will be the thing to do.
As Bill continued on his way to town, he thought over what Aunt Mary had said. Yes, the most important question was, what would be best for the child? But, Bill asked himself again, suppose he refused Ben's proposition, insisted on going to court. He might lose out entirely, lose custody of the child, and, in the end, never get his freedom. Now for our story. Today, Bill Meade had driven out of town to look at some property, decide whether it was a good risk for a substantial loan from David Bowman's bank. This was part of Bill's job as farm appraiser and loan consultant. On his way back to town, Bill had noticed Aunt Mary Lane's little pickup truck parked in front of a house. He stopped for a while to have a little talk with her, a talk which left Bill with one dominant thought in his mind. Now, with a rather grave, preoccupied air about him, Bill goes through the little swinging gate which separates David's domain from the cashier's booths. David looks up with a warm smile.
Well, hello there, Bill. That didn't take you long.
No, it didn't, Mr. Bowman.
How'd you make out?
Very well, I think.
Well, sit down. Sit down.
Thanks. Yes, Mr. Bowman, I think we've got a good loan on that Martelli farm.
Well, Bill, I trust your judgment, if it looks okay to you.
Personally, I don't think we can go wrong. Yeah, got all the data here. Those Italian names sort of threw me, but I think I got them right.
Oh, fine.
Well, I better be getting back to
Well,
work.
Bill, haven't seen you to talk to for several days. How's everything going?
Well, as a matter of fact, Mr. Bowman, I've been wanting to talk to you.
Hmm? What's up? Any news?
Yeah. Mr. Calvert came to see me last night.
Oh, you did, eh? What's Ben got on his mind now?
Well, he made me a rather strange offer.
The fact that Ben made any sort of an offer is strange to begin with. He's more likely to make demands than offers.
Yeah, I know. It surprised me, too.
What was this offer?
Well, he said if I'd give up the baby, if I were willing to let them have custody of the child without taking the matter into court, then Kitt would go away somewhere and get a divorce quietly.
So that's it. That is a rather strange offer from Ben.
He seems to be awfully anxious to keep the thing from getting into court.
Sounds to me as if they're afraid of something. I wonder what it can be.
Well, that's what puzzled me. The trouble is, I don't want to compromise. But I'm a little nervous myself, I guess. I'd hate to make a mess of things, try to fight it out in court and then lose. That way, I'd be even worse off.
Yes. Well, it's impossible to be sure about those things. You never know. But there's a good possibility that you wouldn't lose, Bill. There's a lot to be said on your side, my boy. If necessary, I'd be willing to put my 2 cents worth. If it would do any good.
Oh, that's very swell of you, Mr. Bowman. Makes me feel a lot better to know that, well, that you backed me up.
Well, you can depend on it, Bill. After all, if anybody in this town knows what a selfish, unscrupulous man Ben Calvert is, I do.
Yeah.
I've known Ben since we were both just boys. He hasn't changed much in all these years, except become harder, if anything.
Oh, the more I think about it, the more positive I become about not wanting my kid brought up under his influence.
Well, I'm sure you're right about it, my boy. You know, I had a talk with Kitt not long ago. I had an idea I might be able to make her see things in their true perspective. But it didn't work. I might as well have been talking to a stone wall. She's more like Ben every day.
Yeah, I've seen that, too. Well, I oughtn't to keep you any longer, Mr. Bowman. I better get back to work.
No. It's all right, Bill. Feel free to come in at any time. If I were you, I'd stick to my guns. If you want that baby, feel you can do a good job of bringing him up, we'll work it out somehow, in spite of Ben Calvert.
And at that same moment, at the house on 11th Street, David Bowman's brother-in-law, Ben Calvert, was talking to his wife, Jessie, discussing the same subject which occupied the minds of David and Bill. The baby everyone believed to be the son of Bill and Kitt Meade, Ben's grandson.
As I told him, he'd be crazy to turn down a proposition like that. He'd never win in a million years if he tried to fight it out in court.
What did Bill say to that?
Oh, you know how he is, soft, sentimental. He kept insisting that he wanted to bring the child up himself.
Well, after all, Ben, you can hardly accuse him of being sentimental just because he wants custody of his own son. That's natural enough.
Natural, my eye. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. He doesn't know the first thing about taking care of a child that age.
Well, as to that, he doesn't really need to. No reason why he couldn't afford to get some trained person to look after the child. In fact, maybe he could arrange for Miss Thorndyke to carry on.
Miss Thorndyke? Our nurse? Yeah. Nothing you like so much as a laugh at my expense, is there, Jessie? You might at least try to be helpful, sympathetic.
Well, Ben, I hate to say this, but I think the whole thing is on your own head. If you remember, I foresaw this a long time ago. I told you you'd have trouble.
I told you. You're always predicting the worst. I've gotten so I don't pay any attention.
It's a pity. You might save yourself a lot of trouble if you'd listen to me once in a while.
Well, there's no point in harking Pan. This thing out of court for Kitt's sake. And she's just not up to taking anymore.
Yes. Ben, why is Kitt so jumpy on the subject of a court trial? Surely she has nothing to hide.
Of course she hasn't. What could she? No, it's only natural she'd want to avoid all that publicity, the exposure. Kitt's sensitive.
Oh, very.
Don't be nasty, Jessie. I know you don't like Kitt, but since you've managed to get yourself involved in this family, you might at least have the decency to show a little loyalty.
Well, all right, Ben. What do you want from me? An honest opinion or a hypocritical pat on the back?
Well, it doesn't seem possible that Bill should win out. If he insists on taking the thing to court, he has no grounds.
No grounds? Are you sure of that, Ben?
Of course I'm sure. What grounds could he have? Kitt's been blameless all the way through. Going off like that, having the child thousands of miles away in California. No one to look out for.
Oh, you paint a very pathetic picture. I wonder how much truth there is in it.
What do you mean by that, Jessie? You're implying something.
Oh, nothing. Nothing. But it's better not to be too sure about these things. A smart lawyer can dig up a lot of unpleasant little items sometimes, you know.
Not if there's nothing to dig up.
Oh, of course not. If there is nothing...
Well, Jessie Calvert was thinking of Kitt's reaction the other day when the letter had come from Paul Cromwell.
She certainly acted funny about it. And when I mentioned about Paul's having been in California while she was, it threw her into an absolute jitter. If Kitt knew about that phone call I made, when the housekeeper answered and let the cat out of the bag, told me Paul Cromwell lived right next door, Bill's lawyer might be quite interested in that bit of information if I decided to give it to him. That's why. It must be why she's so frantic about not letting the case go to court. A sharp attorney might be able to make some very damaging implications about Paul Cromwell's living so close by. Especially if he knew the whole story. Knew that Cromwell was crazy about Kitt before she married Bill. And if she has a clear conscience, why did she flare up so at my hinting Paul had been there with her? Unless there was something else. Something connected with Paul which might come out if anyone decided to trace the whole business back. Well, there's something the matter with Kitt because she certainly wouldn't be willing to give Bill a divorce just for custody of the child. No. She must be in a bad spot. Kitt doesn't care about that baby. He's only a means to an end. In fact, she doesn't act like a real mother at all.
Jessie Calvert had no idea how close he'd come to hitting on the actual truth in her secret thoughts. But Ben Calvert and his daughter were in danger of losing everything they wanted most. Because if Jessie decided to tell what she knew of Paul Cromwell's presence in California while Kitt was there, it might come out also that a certain young woman named Lisa Fenner had been there at the same time, had gone to the hospital to have a baby, and had returned without her baby son. Now for our story. It was a beautiful winter day. There'd been a heavy fall of snow last night, and this morning the sun shone brightly on the dazzling white drifts, sparkled in the icicles which festooned the trees in the square across from the Wakefield courthouse. In his room at the Brown Palace Hotel, Nicholas Dorn, the young writer to whom Aunt Mary's niece, Peggy Douglas, was engaged, flung open the window, stood for a moment breathing in the crisp air. This, Nicholas was thinking, this was one of the things he'd missed in Hollywood. The miracle of the changing seasons, the wonderful succession of winter, spring, fall, and summer, each with its own excitement and beauty. He ought to get out more, Nicholas told himself. He'd kept in his room pretty much lately, alternately brooding about his love for Peggy and trying to get some work done on a story he was writing. He wasn't making much progress either way. What he needed was a good, brisk walk, some cold air to clear away the cobwebs. And so, Nicholas put on a heavy overcoat, muffled his neck in a scarf, and set forth. As he walked along, the beauty of the winter day and the sharp, crisp air had dispelled his mood of uneasiness. Unconsciously, he'd started to whistle. Now, as he turned a corner...
Oh, Bill Meade.
Hello, Dorn.
Hi, Bill.
How are you?
Fine. How are you?
Okay. Out for a little air. I like a day like this.
Same here. You mind if I walk along with you?
No, not at all. Glad to have you.
Thanks. Quite a snow we had last night.
Yeah, 6 inches.
You don't say. Yes, sir, I'm really enjoying this weather. California's wonderful, but nice to get a change.
Oh, yeah.
You're a Westerner, too, aren't you, Bill? Didn't Peggy say you grew up in Oregon?
That's right. Beautiful country up there.
So I've heard. Lots of rain, though, I understand.
Yeah, there is. That's one of the things about it. Gives the country almost a tropical look. Keeps everything green, flourishing.
Well, I've knocked around quite a lot. Shipped out a couple of times when I was quite a bit younger. Spent some time in Canada. Of all the places I've seen, there's a lot to be said for this little town.
I like it.
People are friendly, hospitable. They're simple, nothing pretentious, just
folks.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I never thought I'd get to the point of settling down the way I've been feeling lately.
Well, Dorn, that's because you've never had a reason to stay in one place before.
You mean Peggy?
Yes, I do.
You know, Bill, I'm awfully glad we met up like this today. I've even been thinking of getting in touch with you. I heard you were working at the bank. It occurred to me it might be a good idea for us to sort of get together, talk things over.
Oh. Well, Dorn, there doesn't seem to be very much to say. Except, of course, I want to offer you my...
Peggy told me about talking to you the other day.
Yeah?
Yes. I've heard quite a lot about you out at the Lane place. Aunt Mary speaks very highly of you.
Yeah, she's been a wonderful lot of, well, comfort, you might say, these last months.
I hope you'll forgive my being so blunt, Bill, but I'd like you to know that I'm wishing you the best of luck in your present situation.
Thanks, Dorn.
You see, I've gathered a fairly clear picture of what goes on. You know how it is in a little town like this?
Oh, sure. People talk. I know that.
But not maliciously. Don't think that for a minute. In fact, you've a lot of friends on your side. There's Ben Calvert. He's not too popular with the local boys and girls. In spite of the fact that he's your father-in-law at present, I must say it looks to me as if he's a pretty good choice for the most poisonous character of the year.
No, Ben Calvert isn't very popular.
So I think I know what you're up against. It's tough.
Yeah, I'll admit. It's pretty rugged.
Rugged's the word. Thought about it a lot lately. I suppose you think it's none of my business.
Oh, that's okay.
In a way, Bill, it is my business. It's funny, and in spite of the fact that I know the Calverts are a pretty sorry outfit, still, in a sense, they did me a good turn.
Oh, I suppose they have their good points.
No, that isn't what I mean. You see, well, it's a pretty brutal truth, but if you and Kitt hadn't married, things would be... I mean, the whole setup would be a lot different.
That's an understatement.
I mean about Peggy and me.
I know what you mean.
Bill, Peggy's a fine girl.
Yeah. As I started to say before, I want to offer you my...
Hold it a minute, Bill. Look. At the risk of sticking my neck out much too far, I'd like to ask you a very serious question. Do you mind?
No.
Okay, then. Bill, you are in love with Peggy, aren't you?
Look, Dorn, I don't know what you're getting at, but I'm not sure I like this. Aren't you getting a little out of line?
I told you I was sticking my neck out. I know I am. But believe me, I'm not asking without a reason. A darn good reason.
Well, supposing I am in love with her. That's hardly your concern. And I'm not asking for sympathy. Especially from you.
This is the craziest darn situation.
Sure, I know it's crazy. But I don't see what good it does to kick it around. And so far as that goes, I don't understand why you want to bother yourself with it. You're okay. Your life isn't butched up.
It isn't, eh? It's a laugh, Bill, a good, hearty laugh. Look, you think Peggy's in love with me, don't you?
Well, sure I do. She told me she was going to marry you.
Yes, I know she did. I know she called you and that you met and had that long talk. I saw her just afterwards.
Oh.
Yes, I saw her. She was absolutely radiant.
Yeah, she looked lovely, didn't she?
Let's see, what was she wearing that day?
Something bright red, and a woolly sort of coat with a white scarf. And a little red, what do they call them? A beanie. Yeah, I remember. Oh, yeah, and she was wearing red mittens, too.
Oh, brother, you are in love. I'm sorry, Bill. That was sort of hitting below the belt, but I had to be sure of something.
And you have the answer now, is that it?
Yes, I'm pretty sure I have. Look, Meade, man to man, do you think you could convince me you're not in love with a girl whose entire outfit you can describe in every detail, even though it's been a week since you saw her? Now, I know you're not an expert on women's fashion. Somehow you just don't strike me as the type.
All right, Dorn, so I'm in love with Peggy. Very much in love with her. What do you want to do about it?
I don't doubt that you'd be very happy to punch me in the jaw, Meade. Naturally, you think I ought to keep my nose out of your affairs, but what I've been trying to make clear to you is your affairs and mine are pretty much entangled.
Yeah, well, don't worry about it. They won't be. As soon as you and Peggy are married. You can forget there ever was a guy named Bill Meade. I'm sure Peggy has already.
But that's where you're wrong.
Well, if she hasn't, she will very shortly.
Wrong again, Bill. And that's why I'm glad I ran into you today. I have something to tell you which I think ought to interest you very much.
Okay, I'm listening.
The fact is, Bill, we've decided to postpone the wedding.
What? You mean you're not going to be married next week, as Peggy said?
Exactly. The wedding's been postponed indefinitely.
But why? Why, Dorn?
Because I have a very good hunch that the prospective bride's in love with someone else.
Bill Meade looked straight into Dorn's eyes. Searched for the assurance that Nicholas had meant what Bill hoped he did. But the young writer only smiled a twisted, self-conscious smile. Dorn hadn't done it as gracefully as he would have liked to, but at least he'd taken one more step toward an obvious eventuality. A step toward the time when he would have to tell Peggy herself that he could never marry her.